At the last budget, George Osborne will have hoped the economy would move in his direction. Chancellors can make their own rules, but can't control the game. Yet with weeks till the election, his calculations are yet more intense. The walk from number 11 may be lonelier yet.
Laura there. Well, with me here is Ken Clarke, a Chancellor who, as we heard earlier, oversaw a period of austerity in the 90s. It never rained money on his watch, and then after it'd gone, it poured. You didn't quite agree with Duncan's analysis, which implied there were kind of two phases. The early phases...
I didn't agree with Duncan's analysis at all. I inherited a serious fiscal deficit, not as bad as George.
You didn't get it down.
I did, but he came steadily down. Of course he did. I set out a path which Gordon and Tony agreed at the election they would stick to. And it was a combination of squeezing public spending, which I steadily did, and getting low inflation with monetary policy and allowing growth to take off and a recovery. And when I left office, we were on course for a balanced budget, which was my aim, which meant going into a surplus as you went to the top of the cycle. And Gordon and Tony did not change economic policy. They delivered that surplus. What they did do was they ignored the dot-com bubble. They did it twice on their watch. Their regulation was useless of the financial services industry. We had a mad dot-com bubble, so their tax revenues went mad for a bit. Then they collapsed again. And in 2006, the same thing happened even more so. We had a credit boom, then a credit crash. Now, firstly, you shouldn't have booms like that. You should have regulators who stop it happening. Secondly, that doesn't mean there's a pattern to tax revenues. Had they regulated, and they don't set up the FSA, and had they regulated the financial services properly, they would have moved to a steady surplus, which is the plan I left them and the plan they stuck to.
Well, you see, I think a lot of people are hoping that actually bags of money are going to just come in. As the recovery gathers pace, money will come in.
I think money is coming in, and money will come in if you keep on path for the growth that we are steadily attaining and you sustain it.
If the budget arithmetic looks better than people have been thinking, and there's some little hint of that, what would you do with any extra money that appears to be in
I would concentrate on getting a sensible, balanced budget, so going into surplus as soon as possible. With the present level of deficit and the present level of debt are unsustainable. If you keep that, you're never going to get growth really soundly going again. I expect the thing to improve. But instead of making all these forecasts, you have to have these forecasts. But no Chancellor should really believe that it's all going to go like that. You have to react to events. So if we maintain our steady growth, and if you get more revenues than you thought you were going to get at the autumn statement, most of it should be concentrated on getting rid of the deficit and the debt, but it gives you a little more flexibility. And you exercise that sensibly as you go along.
Right. So I want to be 100% clear here. If someone was minded to say, look, we've got $5 billion more than we thought 6 months ago, let's cut taxes with that $5 billion, because, hey, there is an election in a few weeks. What would your advice be, having been in
my advice would be ignore all this rubbish you always get in a pre-election budget about how it's all down to you to give money away. No budget before an election has actually made a difference to an election outcome in living memory. You always get this fuss before it's delivered. My advice to George would be your reputation is rightly based on the steady hand of the pillar that's going to take us, if you finish the job, to this balanced, healthy economy in future. Give that impression in the budget. I happen to think it's a genuine impression that the public are not silly. They're not expecting you to shower them with money. If you can raise the allowances, for example, a bit, fine. But don't get carried away with all this stuff. George's contribution to the election he's already made, but he's got to continue to make it by showing that, fortunately, we have an extremely steady Chancellor who knows what he's doing, and he's going to deliver sustainable, healthy growth in future that future generations can rely on. That is what I would get across in the budget. If there's $5 billion extra, so much the better. If you want to raise allowances a bit, fine.
Well, you say raise allowances, but there's some people saying that's actually turning out to be more expensive than anyone had expected.
It's cost a lot of tax revenue.
More than people expected. And actually, maybe it's time to stop doing that. It's not even helping the low paid, because they're out of tax these days, some of them at least.
That's why you have to react to the real world, to events. we have a debate in which half the pundits keep latching on to 4-year forecasts of where all these figures are going. They're laughable, because the real world has never been like that. That's why George has sensibly taken longer to reach his targets than he was first pronouncing when he got in. If he just stuck to all these daft targets that you read about in the financial pages, he'd have reduced the economy to ruin by now. What he's doing is steadily going in the right direction, and he will continue to do so if he's allowed to.
Last message. We had a discussion on defence at the beginning of the programme, and General Sir Peter Wall suggesting that we need to think again about these cuts that have been made in defence. You've been there, you've had to fight public spending battles. What do you think when you hear generals arguing that? Well,
I've heard generals argue that. They always do before an election. I mean, every lobby comes out of the woodwork before an election, but the generals always come out and saying, they used to tell me if we didn't have 46 frigates, the country was going to be overrun. Of course we're committed to 2%, but not absolutely flexibly. We don't just hand over the money and say spend it. I'd need to be satisfied that they're going to spend the money in a cost-effective way, in a way that's suitable for modern warfare and what we're now doing, and that we're not going to have repeats of the daft procurement, the overruns, the late programmes, the programmes cancelled. That's what a Chancellor of the Exchequer does. Of course, we need to defend the country. But I can't remember an election again. We didn't have all this speculation with all the old generals coming out saying they've cut defence to ribbons,
but what
give
about
us
2%,
some more money.
2% of GDP. Do you think that's a good
is the
target?
NATO commitment.
Yeah,
sure.
So we should stick to that.
Not inflexible. It doesn't mean just hand the money over. And maybe the odd year when you go below it. It's got to be a defence review. There's got to be serious management of the economy. And with great respect, I think, you know, it's pre-election. I'm not squeamish about my trade. You'll get a lot of silly lobbying and comment before you get there.
Ken Clarke, thank you very much indeed. Now, there's no doubt what the big talking point has been today. It came from the BBC and it involved the word fracas. For many, it was how the word and how to pronounce it that was the issue, but for most it was the news that Jeremy Clarkson has been suspended for involvement in a fracas with a producer. The BBC said very little else about it, but the Radio Times has reported that Clarkson's suspension was for allegedly hitting a producer, and that the next 3 episodes of Top Gear will not be broadcast. The Bring Back Clarkson campaign is already active on Twitter, but it's also fair to say a lot of people are not in the Je suis Jeremy camp. Clarkson is, if anything, a Marmite character, even if he brings in a lot of jam for the BBC. He's also someone familiar with the notion of an apology.
Please be assured I did everything in my power to not use that word, and that I'm sitting here begging your forgiveness for the fact that obviously my efforts weren't quite good enough.
Well, there's an interesting management issue here. Broadcasters face it in spades, sports teams too, perhaps hospitals. Everywhere it comes up to some degree. It's stars with big egos who are a law unto themselves. You can't live with them, you can't live without them. I'm joined by the historian of the BBC, Jean Seaton, and Daisy Goodwin, writer and television executive. Daisy Seaton, you made programmes like Grand Designs. Just without naming names even, is the issue around the big presenter who just does things their own
Daisy
way?
Goodwin.
Daisy.
As a TV producer, I expect to do battle with my presenters. It's never actually got physical, but that's what you're paid to do. I think great presenters make programmes. On the other hand, I think that a broadcaster can never allow the talent to get bigger than the programmes. And I think in this particular juncture, Clarkson and his team have been sort of pushing the BBC. You know, they've been goading them in quite an entertaining way. But I think there's a point at which the BBC has to... Well, they put him on the naughty step now, haven't they? And
I think he's been put on the naughty step before. This is the next
how long?
one.
How long can they put him on the naughty step? And I think at some point they've got to say, you know, enough's enough. Because actually, I think that in the end, the BBC's reputation is more important than one piece of talent.
Jean Seaton, I mean, Clarkson is a very big character, obviously, at the BBC, but historically,